The American Revolution, in other words, is never finished. It must always be renewed.
Greater love than this hath no man, than that he lay down his life for his friend.
What if it's not envy?
We must take back our cities, and take back our culture, and take back our country. God bless you, and God bless America.
Let's roll. All right. So welcome everybody to another episode of Contra Mundum. This is one of our premium interviews, and we're very happy to welcome an old friend of our libertarian years.
Yes.
And, you know, he's a great guy. He was Ron Paul's chief of staff and a number of other different things that he can tell you about. But Jeff Deist, thank you for joining us.
It is great to see you guys again.
All right, Jeff. So we have a lot to talk about today. You know, one of the things that I wanted to catch up with you on is this phenomenon of Trump. And I know he's sort of a very talked about person, obviously, but, you know, we're curious about things where you were in Ron Paul's office for a number of different years. So you've kind of seen the whole populist thing happen at the very beginning, you know, just as it was gaining steam at the end of the, financial crisis. So I wanted to get a little bit of your perspective on all that, you know, how the sausage is made in politics, what you think of Trump, and also this growing trajectory among younger people, especially like Ron Paul veterans going toward the right wing. So I wanted to help make sense of all this stuff. So just to kick things off a little bit, why don't you, if you could just summarize what you did for Ron Paul and then maybe where you've gone from there, intellectually or otherwise.
Well, it's pretty remarkable to look at the U.S. House, that joint session of Congress recently, and the reaction by some of the Democrats. I mean, it really is a radically different House of Representatives than when I was up there working for Ron in the 2000s. I was his chief of staff, and just the difference in decorum, the difference in the representatives themselves. I mean, the House was always a step below the Senate. People in the Senate were generally wealthier. They had more Ivy League pedigrees. Generally more intelligent, more accomplished in life. And the House was a little bit more raucous, where the guy who owned 5 car dealerships in an area became the congressman, that sort of thing. But what's happened in the last 20 years since I left, or 15 years, whatever it's been, is pretty radical. That the House no longer really functions, which I think is a good thing. That's what I want. and not from some libertarian sense, but just because I want bad people to suffer for their badness, and part of that is pulling the American public out of its stupor, which I think is happening, and so I'm very pleased with that. But there are people now in the U.S. House of Representatives who are abject idiots, morons, really subhuman people, and that's a reflection of the electorate, and so. Yeah. I think that's something we have to grapple with. Now, you mentioned populism. That is a huge element. I think it's entirely deserved. Let's not forget that elites screwed everything up. Elites ruined the 20th century. They took the golden 19th century and turned it into a century of war and central banking and social insurance and nation building and neoconservatism, and they ruined medicine, they ruined banking, they ruined education, they ruined money. I mean, people say, like, what's with this populism? Well, that's your answer. It's entirely deserved. The elites deserve to be rejected, and that doesn't mean we don't need new elites. We radically do, and I think that's a lot of the growing pains that we're feeling. But working for Ron was interesting because Ron was a real outsider then. I mean, there's a few generations now of Ron Paul fans. I'm an older generation, but what a lot of people don't know is that he spent years and years in the wilderness, really poorly treated by the Republican Party. I mean, when he came into Congress, almost all of the Texas delegation was Democrats. Yeah. And so he stuck his neck out a little bit in '76 and endorsed Reagan. And ever since then, he's always a maverick and a firebrand, and very well liked on a personal level by members of Congress. But he spent a lot of years going and talking to tiny groups and trying to get a sound money newsletter out there and working on things that today are much easier to work on because of digital communications. And so a lot of people who are under, let's say, 30 or 40, they only know Ron as this kind of celebrity, this really sweet older guy and this and that. But you guys have seen him back on Morton Downey and things like that. And so there was a lot of sausage making to become the Ron Paul that we know today.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about is at the end of Ron Paul's time, it kind of almost seemed very hopeless. The atmosphere was very different than it is right now. And, I went offline for a few years after that. What year did he leave Congress? Was that 2016? When was that?
No, he left at the end of 2012.
At the end of 2012. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of when I started disengaging too. It's like, this isn't going anywhere. Libertarian politics is kind of a fool's errand. And then, you come back and you see people like Dave Smith and Michael Malice and some of these others that were like just sort of like on the periphery. They're like kind of big names now. And they're talking to like Joe Rogan and other people. So I'm just curious, like, do you think Ron anticipated any part of the Trump phenomenon?
Well, he predated it and in many ways presaged it. And he's very pleased and flattered by, whatever notoriety or credit he's getting today from Elon Musk or people talking about Doge or people talking about the Fed or auditing Fort Knox gold and that sort of thing. But to understand things, and I felt that same despondence that you felt, if you want to understand the Wilson era, you have to go back to the, post-Civil War 1880s progressive roots to understand that. If you want to understand FDR and the New Deal, you have to go back to the Wilson era. If you want to understand what's happening with Trump today, you really have to go back to people like Ron Paul and Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan, and Ross Perot. And then you could even go back to, if you want to understand Reagan, maybe you have to go back to Goldwater. So these things take time. And I think the ideal for those of us who think the way we do is to understand that we have low time preference. We're trying to build things. We're trying to build structures that last beyond our lifetimes. And we shouldn't be childish in seeking instant gratification. And God knows not through politics, at least of all.
Yeah. One of the things like that's really interesting to me about Ron Paul is, he had all of these great like outsiders as part of his staff. I mean, he had, I forget all their names now, but like the people on foreign policy, the people on monetary policy, he had all these great people. And after he left, I mean, they basically all left Washington. And one of the questions I had is, are any of them still around? Are any of them still operating within the Trump administration at all? Or are they just kind of like gone and on their own way?
Well, not really. I think the idea that we all left Washington was a healthy one. We weren't like these sick Cato types or somebody who just hang around there for 30 years and pretend to be above it all when they're below it. So we meaning Ron's staff, we weren't people who were looking to go work for another member of Congress or go work for a think tank or something. And so, Daniel McAdams is still with Ron, but he's down in Texas. He runs the Liberty Report, which is a YouTube show every day. And Daniel's pretty acerbic on Twitter, which I like to see. Daniel spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and he especially Hungary, and so he understands the populist European right pretty well. And he's also a deep Catholic, and I like to see that kind of influence around Ron. But for the most part, to the extent the Ron Paul revolution lives on, I think it's pretty scattered to the wind.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any does he? I know he always had somewhat of an optimistic cadence about him, which always surprised me. Does he think things are heading in the right direction at all, or because he never comes across as defeated? And if anyone should be defeated, it's Ron Paul. Yeah. But he's still doing do you ever talk to him about the Trump phenomenon?
I have a little bit. He was actually offered towards the very end of the campaign, right before the election itself, when some of those big rallies were happening in Pennsylvania and some of the swing states, he was offered an opportunity to go up and be on stage after Trump and Elon had said some nice things about him. I think he declined because he felt like that would basically be viewed as an endorsement, and fairly enough. and perhaps he wasn't ready for that. I wish he had personally,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, Ron's just wired different. I mean, you have to understand growing up. He's born in 35 in Pittsburgh. 35 is also the same year as Elvis. So it's kind of, it's not World War II. It's a little below that. They call it the silent generation. And, his father was a real Depression era guy who ran a dairy, where the kind where you drove around in a truck and delivered milk bottles to people's actual doorstep. And so those are Ron's early memories. And he's just always had a very sunny disposition. And when he decided to go into medicine, was at the time when the Korean conflict was happening. So rather than be drafted towards the end of his medical school career, this actually screwed him up for a couple of years. It put him behind in his training. Rather than be drafted under duress, he enlisted in order to be a flight surgeon and an officer in the Air Force. And that period, among other things, during the Korean conflict, he was in Afghanistan and saw what had happened there with the British. And that period is what really made him very pro-life, and what made him want to be an OBGYN and help women bring life into the world and help people. And he made a decision that he wouldn't want to carry a gun or shoot people or whatever. So Ron is so unlike how the left has portrayed him over the years. The Slates and the Salons and the Mother Joneses who view him as this right-wing crank. I mean, he's a very nice, genial man, a very, very non-judgmental. But his real legacy, this is what people sleep on, is his real legacy is not going to be having delivered 4,000 babies, which is infinitely more important than being in Congress. It's not even going to be his 2 presidential runs. It's going to be his 5 kids, his 35 grandchildren, thereabouts, going on 8 great-grandchildren. That's the real legacy. When Ron and Carol have almost a 60-year marriage now, 60-ish year marriage, and that's just unmatched, especially amongst politicians. And I think there's a huge lesson here for Ron Paul fans, as it starts at home.
Yeah. All right, one more question and I'll let Andrew talk. But one of the things I really wanted to ask you was, what does Trump mean to you? I mean, obviously it's hilarious to see the journalists, melting down, to see, like Adam Kissinger crying every day on Twitter. Like, that's all great.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you think this is just a lot of like headline hype, or do you think there's actually something going on here that's going to be sustainably beneficial?
Oh, I think there's something going on, and it's not per se about Trump and his personnel and his cabinet. It's not per se about his policies, if you want to call them that. I mean, this is a guy who is blissfully, and I would say thankfully, not ideological. That's one of his great. That's one of his great strengths. That's one of the things I love about him. But the real import behind the Trump phenomenon is that both in 2016 against Hillary and now in 2024, that many million Americans were willing to go off script and vote for this guy. And let's remember, there was a progressive arc. Hillary Clinton was just going to be the first female president, and we were going to continue with this sort of neoliberal post-war consensus. And it turns out now, especially in light of what we're finding out about the media and through groups like USAID, AID, is the post-war consensus was fake. It never existed. The old right was right. Most people agreed with the old right. And the post-war consensus was a manufactured elite propaganda thing that was imposed upon us. It didn't come up bottom up naturally. The idea that we should have these sort of liberal social democracies around the world, and that the West is the model. And then after the Cold War, especially after '89, that the United States should be the unipolar head of all of this. I mean, nobody bought this stuff, this Francis Fukuyama end of history stuff. Nobody bought the neoconservative line. And the idea that was the, animating impulse of the American right was just, it was the animating impulse of the Beltway, and that's about it. And so, people will put up with a lot as long as the economy's pretty good. I mean, that's just the reality. And they'll, they'll even support, yeah, we got to get Saddam and we got to go kill those terrorists over there. But I think Trump has really demonstrated that enough people understand or feel the rot,
Mhm.
and they may not completely understand what caused the rot. They may not completely understand how to solve the rot, and none of us do. It's a big problem.
Mhm.
It's a multifaceted, multi-decade project. But nonetheless, they felt it. And the fact that they felt it and acted on that, I think, says a hell of a lot about that there's still a pulse in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, piggybacking on that, what you say, nobody knows how to solve it. Hey, which is true. I mean, it's this Gordian knot, right, that can't be unfurled by any one person. But at the same time, right, so many chickens are coming home to roost after 60 or 80 years of economic destruction, mass migration, social engineering of the entire society, and just breaking everything down. And then on top of that, we mentioned, maybe it was off air before, but like the fiscal problems are eventually they're going to be real, right?
And
Right.
nothing's actually been solved. Like all this
Yeah.
Doge savings, it's
Yeah.
like, I don't even know if it's even worth talking about, because the numbers are so astronomical and kind of Looney Tunes that even the Doge cuts, it's like, is that actually solvency?
Like billions of dollars is like saving a few cents each month on your
Mhm.
mortgage, right? And
Mhm.
so like the fiscal issue, I mean, it is one that's this sort of Damocles that hangs over everything. And so that, but it's one where it's like, okay, 20 years ago, people are saying, yeah, any minute now, the entire world economy is going to collapse because we can't fund Social Security or whatever. But they're always able to manipulate things. They're always able to, sell bonds or whatever, monetary, games that they play. Right. But eventually those things will not work. Right. Whether it's 20 years from now or 50 years from now, right, that will, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, and this is definitely your wheelhouse here, Jeff, but I think, right, that those things are like something is going to happen eventually, right? Maybe in our lifetimes, where none of this will ever be tenable again. And so, right, can that be forestalled? Can that be changed? Can it be turned around? I mean, even the idea of having a universal mass democracy where half the country gets paid off by the other half, right? Like nobody's gonna vote against that. Like, yeah, I'm gonna cut all the free stuff. Like that's never going to win. Like, obviously, so it's not going to come through a political process, it'll come through a political process, but not an electoral one. So, right, I mean, what do you think that looks like over the next 40 years, right? I mean, it's for a very broad question, but
Well,
like the temperature is going to get cranked up.
Andrew's seeking financial advice.
Yeah.
This ends the free access portion of the interview. For the full 90-minute discussion, please go to contramundumpod.com/premium and sign up for any of the support tiers. There you can find the links for the full conversation and get access to our Appeal to Heaven show, which features our 20-episode series called Repealing the 20th Century. All this content requires financial resources, and we are grateful for everyone willing to pitch in. See you on the other side.